The autumn rain fell in steady sheets across the high desert of Arizona Territory, turning the red earth to mud and filling the arroyos with rushing water. Tom Brennan pulled his hat low over his eyes as he guided his horse through the gate of the double-bar ranch, another long day of mending fence behind him. The gelding's hooves squelched in the saturated ground, and Tom was already thinking of the dry bunk and hot coffee waiting in the ranch house when he saw her. She stood motionless in the downpour, 20 yards from the main house, her dark hair plastered to her head and her simple brown dress soaked through. But it wasn't her presence that stopped Tom cold in his saddle. It was the way she held herself, straight and still as a sentinel, and the small piece of paper clutched in her right hand. Even through the rain and the gathering dusk, Tom could see she was Apache. The high cheekbones, the set of her shoulders, the way she seemed to belong to the landscape even as she stood apart from it. His horse shifted restlessly beneath him, sensing his sudden tension. "You lost, miss?" Tom called out, his voice carrying poorly through the rain. "This here's private property." She turned toward him then, and Tom felt something cold settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the weather. Her eyes were dark and direct, holding a weight that seemed too heavy for someone who couldn't be more than 22 or 23. When she spoke, her English was perfect, educated, with only the slightest trace of an accent. "I'm looking for Thomas Brennan," she said. "I was told he works here." Tom's hand tightened on the reins. Nobody had called him by his full name in years. Out here, he was just Tom, or Brennan to the other hands. "Who's asking?" Instead of answering, she raised the paper in her hand. Even from a distance, Tom could see it was old, yellowed with age and softened by handling. The ink had run slightly in the rain, but not enough to obscure what was written there. "I think you know who I am," she said. Tom dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the mud. The years seemed to peel away as he walked toward her, and suddenly he was 23 again, wearing cavalry blue and riding through the smoke of a burning Apache village. The memory hit him like a physical blow, the crack of rifle fire, the screams of horses and women, the smell of burning brush and something worse, and a little girl, maybe 10 years old, crouched behind an overturned water jar, her eyes wide with terror. "Jesus," Tom whispered, stopping 3 feet away from her. "Are you the girl from Canyon de Chelly?" She nodded, rain dripping from her chin. "My Apache name is Aiyana. The white family who raised me called me Mary Morrison, but I think you knew me before I had either name." Tom's throat felt dry despite the rain soaking through his shirt. "How did you find me?" "It took 2 years." Her voice was steady, but Tom could hear the emotion beneath it. "I started in Fort Apache, then Tucson, then here. People remember a cowboy who keeps to himself, who drinks alone and never talks about the war." She held out the note, and Tom recognized his own handwriting even after 12 years. The paper was soft as cloth from handling, the words barely legible. "Apache girl, about 10 years old, parents killed in raid, suitable for Christian adoption. T. Brennan, 7th Cavalry." "I found this in my adopted father's papers after he died," Aiyana said. "Reverend Morrison kept it all these years. I think he wanted me to know the truth someday." Tom stared at the note, remembering the chaos of that day, the split-second decision that had changed everything. The other scouts were already moving on, the village was burning, and there was this child, alone and terrified. He'd had maybe 30 seconds to decide her fate. "Your parents," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, I couldn't." "Were they really dead?" The question cut through the rain like a blade. "Or did you just assume they were?" Tom looked up at her, seeing the pain and anger she'd been carrying for 12 years. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Everything was burning. There were bodies everywhere. I never saw them, but I thought, you thought it would be easier to write me off as an orphan than to find out the truth." The accusation hung between them, heavy as the storm clouds overhead. Tom wanted to defend himself, to explain about the chaos and the pressure from his commanding officer, to move fast and ask questions later. But looking at this young woman who'd been torn from her world because of words he'd scrawled on a piece of paper, all his justifications crumbled. "Yeah," he said, "I reckon I did." Lightning flickered in the distance, followed by the roll of thunder. The ranch house glowed with warm yellow light, and Tom could see curious faces at the windows, the other hands wondering what was going on in the yard. "We should get out of this rain," he said. "You'll catch your death." Aiyana shook her head. "I'm not here for shelter. I'm here for answers." "Then you'll need more than I can give you standing in a muddy yard." Tom gestured toward the house. "Whatever you want to know, whatever you need from me, it'll take time. And you're soaked through." She studied his face for a long moment, as if weighing whether to trust him. Finally, she nodded. "I have a room at the hotel in Prescott. I can come back tomorrow when the weather clears." "Wait." Tom reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out his tobacco pouch, extracting a few crumpled bills. "Take this for your room for food. It's the least I can do." Aiyana looked at the money, then back at his face. "I don't want your charity." "It's not charity, it's—" Tom struggled for the right words. "It's what I owe you for 12 years of questions I should have answered." She took the money, her fingers brushing his briefly. Her skin was cold from the rain, but her touch burned like a brand. "Tomorrow then," she said. "But I want the truth, Mr. Brennan, all of it. About that day, about my family, about why you made the choice you made." Tom watched her walk away into the rain, her figure disappearing into the darkness beyond the ranch gate. He stood there long after she was gone, the note still clutched in his hand, feeling the weight of 12 years of guilt settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Behind him, the ranch house door opened, and Bill Patterson, the foreman, stepped onto the porch. "Tom? Who was that?" Tom folded the note carefully and put it in his pocket. "Someone from a long time ago, Bill. Someone I thought I'd never see again. Apache, wasn't she? What did she want with you?" Tom turned toward the house, his boots heavy in the mud. "Justice," he said quietly, "and I'm not sure I can give it to her." The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having washed the desert air clean. Tom stood outside the Prescott Hotel at first light, his hat in his hands and his stomach churning with nerves he hadn't felt since his first cavalry charge. The main street was still quiet, only a few early risers heading to work at the mine or the sawmill. Aiyana emerged from the hotel as the sun crested the mountains, wearing the same brown dress but with a heavy woolen shawl around her shoulders. She looked rested, but Tom could see the tension in her movements, the way she held herself ready for whatever he might tell her. "I brought horses," Tom said, nodding toward 2 saddled mounts tied to the hitching post. "Figured we might need privacy for this conversation." She studied the horses, then looked back at him. "Where are we going?" "There's a place up in the hills. Quiet. We can talk without half the town listening in." Tom hesitated, then added, "I saw how folks looked at you when you walked to the hotel yesterday. This town's got a long memory when it comes to the Apache wars." Aiyana's jaw tightened. "I've lived with those looks for 12 years, Mr. Brennan. They don't frighten me anymore." But Tom had caught the slight tremor in her voice. He helped her mount the smaller horse, a gentle mare named Stella, and they rode out of town in silence, climbing into the pine-covered hills that overlooked the valley. The place Tom had chosen was a small clearing beside a creek, sheltered by tall ponderosa pines, and far enough from any trail that they wouldn't be disturbed. He'd come here often over the years when the memories got too heavy, when he needed to be alone with his ghosts. They dismounted and sat on a fallen log beside the water. Tom pulled out his tobacco pouch and rolled a cigarette with shaking hands, trying to find the words to begin. "Tell me about that day," Aiyana said, her voice steady. "From the beginning." Tom lit his cigarette and took a long drag. "It was October 1870. We'd been tracking a band of Chiricahua Apache for 3 weeks. They'd raided some ranches down near the Mexican border, killed a family named Henderson. My commanding officer, Captain Morrison—" "Morrison?" Aiyana's head snapped up. "That was my adopted father's name. Samuel Morrison." Tom nodded grimly. "Same man. He was a captain then, before he found God and became a preacher. He was leading the expedition." The pieces were falling into place now, and Tom could see the realization dawning in Aiyana's eyes. Her adoption hadn't been coincidence. It had been orchestrated by the very man who'd ordered the raid that destroyed her family. "Jesus," she whispered. "He never told me." Morrison was ambitious, wanted to make colonel, and the army brass were putting pressure on field commanders to show results against the Apache. "We tracked your people to Canyon de Chelly, to a winter camp hidden in the rocks." Tom's voice grew hoarse. "It was supposed to be a surgical strike, capture the raiders, bring them back for trial. But it wasn't." "No, it wasn't." Tom stared into the creek, watching the water flow over the stones. "The shooting started before we were even in position. One of the younger soldiers got spooked, thought he saw movement in the brush. After that, it was chaos." Aiyana was quiet for a long moment. "How many died?" 15, maybe 20. Most of them were women and children. Tom's cigarette had burned down to his fingers, but he didn't notice. "Your people fought back, but they were outnumbered. The whole thing was over in maybe an hour. And you found me after. I was checking the shelters, looking for wounded. You were in a brush hut near the creek, hiding behind a water jar. You had blood on your dress, but you weren't hurt. I think you'd been hiding there since the shooting started." Tom could see it all again, the little girl with enormous dark eyes, pressing herself against the clay vessel as if she could disappear into it. She hadn't cried, hadn't made a sound, but her whole body had been shaking. "I tried to talk to you," he continued, "but you didn't speak English then, and my Apache was terrible. I knew if I left you there, you'd die." The other soldiers were already talking about moving on, leaving the dead unburied. Morrison was in a hurry to get back to the fort. "So you decided my fate for me." "I was 23 years old and scared as hell," Tom said defensively. "I'd seen what happened to Apache children left alone in the desert. I thought I was saving your life by stealing it." Aiyana's voice was bitter. "Do you know what it's like to grow up between worlds? To be too Apache for the white folks and too white for the Apache? To lie awake at night wondering if your parents are still alive, if they're looking for you?" Tom felt the full weight of her pain, and it nearly crushed him. "I'm sorry, I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry. Sorry doesn't tell me what happened to my family." Aiyana stood up, pacing to the edge of the creek. "I need to know, Mr. Brennan. Were my parents among the dead? Did they survive? Do I have brothers, sisters, relatives who might still be alive?" Tom dropped his cigarette and ground it under his heel. "I don't know. I never saw the bodies up close. Morrison had us burn everything and move out fast. Said it was to prevent disease, but I think he was just trying to cover up how badly the whole thing went wrong. Then we need to find out." Aiyana turned back to him, and Tom saw something hard and determined in her eyes. "I want to go back to Canyon de Chelly. That's Apache land, reservation land. It's not safe for someone like me." "Then it's a good thing I'm not someone like you." Aiyana's smile was sharp as a blade. "I may have been raised white, but I'm still Apache, and I have a right to know what happened to my people." Tom stood up, feeling every one of his 35 years. "Even if we go, even if we find survivors, what makes you think they'll talk to us? You've been gone 12 years. They might not even remember you." "They'll remember." Aiyana's voice was certain. "Apache don't forget their children, Mr. Brennan, even when they're stolen from them." The words hit Tom like a physical blow. He'd spent 12 years telling himself he'd done the right thing, that he'd saved this girl's life. But looking at her now, seeing the pain and anger and desperate hope in her eyes, he realized he'd been lying to himself. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll take you to Canyon de Chelly." "Why? Why would you help me now?" Tom looked at her, this young woman whose life he'd forever altered with a hastily scrawled note. "Because I owe you more than money or apologies. I owe you the truth, and maybe I need to know what happened that day as much as you do." Aiyana studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "How long will it take to get there?" 3 days hard riding, maybe 4 if we take it easy." Tom began calculating supplies, routes, the best way to approach Apache land without getting them both killed. "We'll need to be careful. There are still soldiers patrolling the area, and some of the Apache bands aren't too friendly to white visitors." "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow at dawn. I'll need today to get provisions. Tell Bill I'm taking some time off." Tom paused. "You sure about this? Once we start down this road, there's no going back." Aiyana walked to her horse and swung into the saddle with fluid grace. "I started down this road 12 years ago when you wrote that note, Mr. Brennan. I'm just finally going to see where it leads." As they rode back toward town, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading towards something that would change both their lives forever. The past was a dangerous country, and they were about to cross its borders with nothing but hope and determination to guide them. Behind them, the mountains stood silent and watchful, holding their secrets close. But soon, Tom knew, those secrets would have to be surrendered. The dead of Canyon de Chelly had waited 12 years for justice. It was time to give them their due. They left Prescott before dawn, riding east through the purple shadows of the mountains. Tom had packed light, bedrolls, salt pork, hardtack, and enough water for 3 days. He'd also brought his Winchester and a Colt .45, though he hoped they wouldn't need them. The last thing he wanted was to arrive at Canyon de Chelly with blood on his hands. Aiyana rode beside him in silence, her face set with determination. She'd traded her brown dress for men's riding clothes, wool pants, a cotton shirt, and sturdy boots that Tom suspected she'd borrowed or bought in town. The transformation was startling. Dressed like a man, with her hair braided and tucked under a wide-brimmed hat, she could almost pass for a young cowboy from a distance. "Smart thinking," Tom said as they climbed into the high country. "Folks see what they expect to see." "The Morrisons taught me that," Aiyana replied. "When we went to town, Mrs. Morrison always had me wear my hair in braids and keep my head down, said it was safer that way." Tom heard the bitterness in her voice and felt another stab of guilt. This young woman had spent 12 years learning to hide who she was, to make herself smaller and less threatening to the white world that had claimed her, all because of a decision he'd made in 30 seconds of chaos. They rode through country that grew wilder with each mile, pine forests giving way to red rock canyons, the air growing thinner and colder as they climbed toward the high desert. Tom knew this land from his cavalry days, but it looked different now, more beautiful and more dangerous. Without the protection of his uniform and the backing of the U.S. Army, he was just another white man in Apache territory. By midday, they'd reached the rim of Canyon de Chelly, and Tom felt his chest tighten as he looked down into the massive chasm. The canyon stretched for miles, its red sandstone walls rising hundreds of feet from the narrow valley floor. Ancient ruins clung to the cliff faces, the homes of the Anasazi, the old ones who had lived here long before the Apache or the white man. "I remember this place," Aiyana said quietly. "Not the raid, but before. Playing with other children by the creek, helping the women gather piñon nuts in the fall." Tom studied her face, seeing the pain and longing there. "You want to rest here? We could make camp. Go down in the morning." "No," Aiyana's voice was firm. "I've waited 12 years. I won't wait another night." They found a narrow trail that switched back down the canyon wall, treacherous with loose rock, and narrow enough that they had to lead their horses single file. Tom went first, testing each step, while Aiyana followed with the sure-footed grace of someone who'd grown up in this country. The descent took 2 hours. When they finally reached the canyon floor, the sun was already slanting low between the walls, throwing long shadows across the valley. The creek ran clear and cold, lined with cottonwoods whose leaves had turned gold with the autumn chill. "Where was your camp?" Tom asked, though he was already pretty sure he knew. Aiyana pointed upstream, where the canyon bent around a massive stone pillar. "There, where the water runs shallow over the stones." They walked their horses along the creek, and Tom felt the ghosts of the past pressing close around him. 12 years ago, he'd ridden this same path with 40 other soldiers, their sabers rattling and their horses' hooves echoing off the canyon walls. Now the silence was complete, except for the sound of running water and the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. They rounded the bend, and Tom stopped short. The place where the Apache camp had been was now just a meadow beside the creek, with no sign that people had ever lived there. The grass grew green and thick, and wildflowers bloomed in patches of yellow and red. Nature had reclaimed the site of the massacre, hiding the evidence of what had happened. "It's gone," Aiyana whispered. "Everything's gone." Tom dismounted and walked to the center of the meadow. If he looked carefully, he could still see the slight depressions where the brush shelters had stood, the circles of stones where cook fires had burned, but to someone who hadn't been there that day, it would look like nothing more than a peaceful camping spot. "Fire clears the land," he said gently. "Lets new things grow." Aiyana was walking slowly around the meadow, her eyes scanning the ground as if she could will the past back into existence. She stopped suddenly and knelt beside a large boulder near the creek. "Here," she said. "This is where I was hiding." Tom joined her beside the rock. Behind it, partially hidden by tall grass, was a shallow depression in the ground, the remains of the water jar that had sheltered a terrified 10-year-old girl. The clay had long since crumbled away, but the shape was still there like a ghost in the earth. "You remember," Tom said. "I remember everything." Aiyana's voice was barely above a whisper. "The sound of the guns, the screaming, the smell of smoke. I remember you finding me, trying to talk to me. You had kind eyes even then." Tom felt his throat tighten. "I should have tried harder to find your family. Should have made sure they were really dead before I wrote that note." "Where would you have looked? In the pile of bodies Morrison had you burn?" Aiyana's voice was sharp with old pain. "You were a soldier following orders. I understand that now." A sound from upstream made them both freeze, the soft whinny of a horse, followed by the scrape of hooves on stone. Tom's hand moved instinctively to his gun, but Aiyana caught his wrist. "Wait," she said. "Listen." The sound came again, and this time Tom heard what she'd noticed, the rhythm of unshod hooves, the way the horse moved with the easy confidence of an animal that knew this country. This wasn't a cavalry patrol or a group of white travelers. This was someone who belonged here. 3 Apache riders emerged from the trees upstream, their horses stepping carefully along the creek bank. They were young men, maybe 25 or 30, wearing a mixture of traditional and white man's clothing, buckskin pants, cotton shirts, headbands holding back their long black hair. All 3 carried rifles, and their eyes were hard as they studied the strangers in their canyon. The leader, a man with a scar across his left cheek, spoke in Apache to Aiyana. His voice was sharp, demanding. Aiyana replied in the same language, her words halting at first, then growing more confident as the old tongue came back to her. Tom couldn't follow the conversation, but he could read the tension in the Apache riders' postures. They were suspicious, maybe hostile. His hand stayed near his gun, but he forced himself to remain calm. Any sudden movement could turn this meeting deadly. The scarred man asked another question, and Aiyana's answer made all three riders stiffen. The youngest one, barely out of his teens, leaned forward in his saddle and spoke rapidly, his voice rising with excitement. "What are they saying?" Tom asked quietly. "They want to know why we're here," Aiyana replied without taking her eyes off the Apache men. "I told them I was looking for my family. The young one, he says he remembers me." The scarred man spoke again, and this time his voice was gentler. He gestured toward the meadow, then to Aiyana, then to Tom. His meaning was clear even without translation. "He knows about the raid," Aiyana said. "He was here that day." Tom felt his blood turn to ice. If these men had been at the massacre, if they'd seen him in his cavalry uniform, then he and Aiyana were in mortal danger. But the Apache riders made no move to raise their weapons. Instead, the scarred man dismounted and walked slowly toward Aiyana. When he spoke this time, his voice was soft with wonder. "Aiyana, little moon," Aiyana's breath caught. "You know my name. I am Nalnish, I was your mother's brother." The man's English was accented but clear. "I thought you were dead. We all thought you were dead." The words hit Tom like a physical blow. This wasn't just any Apache survivor. This was Aiyana's family. Her uncle, who'd spent 12 years believing she was dead, just as she'd spent 12 years not knowing if any of her family had survived. Aiyana took a step toward the man, then stopped, uncertainty flickering across her face. "My mother, is she—" Nalnish's expression grew grave. "She lives, but she has mourned you for 12 winters. She will not believe you have returned until she sees you with her own eyes. And my father, he died in the raid. He tried to protect the women and children, but there were too many soldiers." Nalnish's gaze shifted to Tom, and his eyes hardened. Like him, Tom felt the weight of 40 years of hatred and grief in that stare. He'd found what they'd come looking for. Aiyana's family was alive, and they remembered everything. But now he had to face the consequences of his actions, not just with Aiyana, but with the people whose lives he'd helped destroy. The canyon walls seemed to close in around them, and Tom realized that their journey to the past was just beginning. The hardest part, the reckoning, was yet to come. The Apache camp lay hidden in a side canyon, invisible from the main trail and shielded by towering walls of red stone. As they rode deeper into the narrow passage, Tom counted at least 30 people, men, women, and children, living in a mixture of traditional wickiups and army surplus tents. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and the sound of children's laughter echoed off the canyon walls. But as their small party approached, the laughter died. One by one, the Apache stopped what they were doing and turned to stare at the strangers. Tom felt the weight of their collective gaze, and his horse seemed to sense his tension, sidestepping nervously beneath him. "Stay calm," Nalnish said quietly. "Many here remember the raid. They remember soldiers like you." "I understand," Tom replied, though his hand remained close to his gun, not because he intended to use it, but because 12 years of frontier life had taught him to be ready for anything. An elderly woman emerged from one of the larger wickiups, her grey hair braided with silver ornaments, and her face lined with the deep creases of age and sorrow. She wore a traditional dress of deerskin, decorated with beadwork in patterns that Tom didn't recognize, but somehow found beautiful. When she saw Aiyana, the old woman stopped, as if she'd been struck by lightning. Her mouth opened slightly, and her weathered hands rose to cover her heart. "Aiyana?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried clearly in the still air of the canyon. "Yes, mother." Aiyana slid from her horse and walked slowly toward the woman. "I have come home." The reunion was unlike anything Tom had ever witnessed. The two women came together in the center of the camp, surrounded by their people, and when they embraced, it seemed as if the very air around them shimmered with emotion. The old woman, Aiyana's mother, wept openly, her hands touching her daughter's face as if to make sure she was real. Other people pressed close, and Tom began to understand that this wasn't just a family reunion. This was the return of someone who had been mourned as dead, whose loss had left a wound in the entire community. Women touched Aiyana's arms and shoulders, murmuring words in Apache. Children stared with wide eyes, and the men nodded with grave satisfaction. But not everyone was celebrating. Tom noticed several younger warriors standing apart from the group, their faces hard with suspicion. Their eyes kept moving between Aiyana and him, and Tom could read the questions in their expressions. Why had she come back now? And why had she brought a white man with her? One of these men stepped forward, his voice cutting through the emotional reunion. He was perhaps 30 years old, with the lean build of a warrior and scars on his arms that spoke of many battles. When he spoke in Apache, his tone was sharp and challenging. Nalnish answered him, but the warrior wasn't satisfied. He pointed at Tom, then at Aiyana, his voice rising with anger. Other men began to gather around them, and Tom felt the mood of the camp shift from joy to something darker. "What's he saying?" Tom asked quietly. Aiyana looked back at him, her face troubled. "His name is Goyathle. He's asking why I brought a white soldier to our camp. He says the spirits of the dead are angry." "Tell him I'm not a soldier anymore," Tom said. "It doesn't matter to him." Aiyana's voice was strained. "He says a soldier is always a soldier, and that you've brought danger to our people just by being here." Goyathle spoke again, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. This time, even Tom could understand part of what he was saying. The man was speaking of revenge, of settling old debts. "Tom," Aiyana said urgently, "you need to leave. Now." But before Tom could respond, Aiyana's mother raised her hand, and the camp fell silent. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of age and wisdom, and even the angry warriors listened respectfully. "What is she saying?" Tom asked. "She says that today is a day of joy, not revenge, that her daughter has returned from the dead, and that is a miracle not to be spoiled by old hatred." Aiyana paused, listening as her mother continued. "She says that if you came here with me, if you helped me find my way home, then you are under her protection." Goyathle clearly didn't like this pronouncement. He argued with the old woman, his voice respectful but determined. Other warriors nodded in agreement, and Tom realized that the camp was splitting into factions, those who welcomed Aiyana's return and those who saw only danger in Tom's presence. The argument continued for several minutes, with Nalnish trying to mediate between the two sides. Finally, the old woman spoke again, her voice sharp with finality. "She has made a decision," Aiyana translated. "You will stay for 3 days. During that time you will tell your story to the elders, all of it. What happened during the raid, why you helped me, what you've done since. Then they will decide what to do with you." Tom looked around the camp at the faces watching him, with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. 3 days among people who had every reason to hate him, who had lost family and friends in the raid he'd participated in. It was either very brave or very stupid, and he wasn't sure which. "All right," he said. "I'll stay." That night they made camp in a section of the canyon reserved for visitors. Tom had been given a small tent and told to keep to himself until the council meeting the next day. Aiyana spent the evening with her mother and uncle, speaking in Apache and slowly reconnecting with the family she'd lost 12 years ago. Around midnight, she came to his tent. Tom was sitting by a small fire, unable to sleep and staring into the flames. "How did it go?" he asked. "Hard." Aiyana sat down across from him, her face illuminated by the flickering light. "They want to know everything, where I've been, what I've learned, whether I'm still Apache or if I've become white." "What did you tell them?" "The truth, that I don't know what I am anymore." She looked at him across the fire. "My mother says I speak Apache like a child now. The words are there, but they're rusty, and there are things I've forgotten. Songs, stories, ways of doing things that were as natural as breathing when I was 10. Tom heard the pain in her voice and felt another stab of guilt. "I'm sorry. I never thought about what it would cost you, living in the white world." "It wasn't all bad," Aiyana said quietly. "The Morrisons were kind to me in their way. They taught me to read and write, gave me an education, but they also taught me to be ashamed of who I was, to hide my heritage like it was something shameful. And now I'm caught between worlds, too white for here, too Apache for there." She poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. "Goyathle says I'm contaminated, that I've been poisoned by white thinking. What do you think?" Aiyana was quiet for a long moment. "I think I'm tired of being defined by other people's expectations. I want to be both things, Apache and educated, traditional and modern. I want to choose my own path." Tom studied her face in the firelight. "That's going to be hard. Most folks don't like it when you refuse to fit into their neat little boxes." "I know." Aiyana stood up, brushing dust from her clothes. "But I've spent 12 years trying to be what other people wanted me to be. Maybe it's time to figure out what I want." She turned to go, then paused. Tom, tomorrow, when you tell your story to the elders, tell them the truth, all of it. Don't try to make yourself look better or make excuses. They'll respect honesty even if they don't like what they hear. And if they decide I'm too dangerous to let live, Aiyana looked back at him, her expression serious. Then you'd better hope that my mother's protection is stronger than their desire for revenge. After she left, Tom sat by the fire for a long time, thinking about the story he would tell and the price he might pay for telling it. Somewhere in the darkness, he could hear the sound of Apache voices speaking in their ancient tongue, and he wondered if those voices were discussing his fate. Tomorrow, he would face the consequences of a decision he'd made 12 years ago. Tonight, he could only pray that the truth would be enough to save him, and to give Aiyana the closure she deserved. The fire burned low, and the canyon walls stood silent around him, keeping their secrets and waiting for dawn. The council gathered at dawn in a natural amphitheater carved into the canyon wall by centuries of wind and water. 7 elders sat in a semicircle on woven mats, their faces grave in the early morning light. Tom stood in the center, feeling small and exposed under their collective gaze. Aiyana sat with her mother and uncle to one side, while Goyathle and the other warriors formed a second group, their hostility barely contained. The eldest of the council, a man so old his hair was white as snow and his face mapped with deep lines, spoke first. His voice was soft, but carried the weight of authority earned over many decades. "He wants you to tell your story," Aiyana translated. "From the beginning, leave nothing out." Tom took a deep breath and began. He spoke slowly, allowing Nalnish to translate his words into Apache, and told them everything about his youth in Missouri, his reasons for joining the cavalry, the orders that brought him to Canyon de Chelly. He described the raid in brutal detail, holding nothing back about the chaos and violence that had erupted in their peaceful camp. When he reached the moment of finding Aiyana, Tom's voice grew hoarse with emotion. "I found her hiding behind a water jar, terrified and alone. The other soldiers were already mounting up to leave. I had maybe 2 minutes to decide what to do." He pulled the yellowed note from his pocket, the same one Aiyana had shown him in the rain 3 days ago. "I wrote this. It was a coward's way out. Instead of trying to find her family, instead of taking the time to learn if anyone had survived, I made a decision that would change her life forever." Goyathle spoke sharply, his voice cutting through the morning air. Nalnish translated reluctantly. "He says you stole a child from her people, that this is a crime that demands blood." "He's right," Tom said, surprising everyone. "I did steal her, not with evil intent, but the result was the same. I took a child from her family, her culture, her people. I told myself I was saving her life, but really I was just taking the easy path." The eldest council member asked a question, and Tom waited for the translation. "He wants to know what you have done with your life since that day. Have you continued to make war on the Apache?" Tom shook his head. "I left the army 6 months after the raid. Couldn't stomach it anymore. I've spent the last 11 years working cattle, keeping to myself, trying not to think about what I'd done. But it followed me everywhere. The memory of that little girl's eyes, the weight of the choice I'd made." "And why did you come here now?" This question came from Aiyana's mother, her voice gentle but probing. "Because she asked me to. Because I owed her the truth, and I owed your people an accounting for my actions." Tom looked around the circle, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "I can't undo what I did. I can't bring back the dead or give Aiyana back the 12 years she lost with her family. But I can stand here and admit my wrongs, and accept whatever justice you decide." A long silence fell over the gathering. The elders conferred among themselves in low voices, their words too quiet for Tom to catch, even if he could have understood them. Goyathle argued passionately with the council, clearly advocating for harsh punishment. Other voices rose and fell, and Tom realized that his fate hung in the balance of this ancient deliberation. Finally, the eldest elder raised his hand for silence. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of judgment. Nalnish translated, his expression troubled. "He says that by the old ways your crime demands payment in blood. You took part in the killing of our people, in the stealing of our children. This cannot be forgiven with words alone." Tom felt his mouth go dry, but he forced himself to stand straight. He'd known this was a possibility when he'd agreed to come here. "But," Nalnish continued, "there are other considerations. You helped bring our daughter home. You have shown courage in coming here, knowing you might not leave alive, and our daughter has spoken for you, asking that mercy be shown." Aiyana had spoken for him? Tom looked at her in surprise, but her face was unreadable. The elder continued speaking. and Tom saw several of the warriors grow agitated at his words. "The council has reached a decision," Nalnish said. "You will not be killed, but neither will you leave unchanged. You must make restitution for your crimes." "What kind of restitution?" The elder gestured toward Aiyana. "For 12 years, our daughter lived in the white world, learning their ways but forgetting ours. Now she must learn to be Apache again. You will help her." Tom frowned, not understanding. "How?" "You will stay here for 1 full year. You will work for the good of our people, using whatever skills you have to help us survive and prosper. You will learn our ways as our daughter learned yours. And when the year is complete, you will help her build a bridge between our worlds." "A bridge?" Aiyana spoke for the first time since the council began, her voice clear and strong. "The Apache need to learn to deal with the white world without losing who we are. We need schools, but Apache schools. We need to trade with white towns without being cheated. We need someone who understands both worlds to help us navigate the future." Tom began to understand. "You want me to help you survive in a changing world. The old ways are not enough anymore," the eldest elder said through Nalnish. "The buffalo are gone, the soldiers are everywhere, and our children must learn new skills to survive, but we will not let them forget who they are. You will help us find this balance." Goyathle stood abruptly, his face dark with anger. He spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing toward Tom with obvious contempt. "He says this is not justice," Nalnish translated. "He says a white man cannot be trusted, that you will betray us, as all white men do." The elder responded calmly, and Tom caught the word for wisdom in his Apache vocabulary. Nalnish smiled slightly as he translated. "He says that wisdom sometimes means turning an enemy into an ally, that the best way to ensure your loyalty is to give you a stake in our future." Tom looked around the circle one more time, then at Aiyana, who was watching him with an expression of hope and uncertainty. "I accept," he said. 1 year of my life in service to your people. It's a small price to pay for the harm I've caused." The council seemed satisfied with his answer, but Goyathle was not. The warrior stalked from the amphitheater, several of his supporters following. Tom realized that while the official judgment had been rendered, not everyone would accept it gracefully. As the council dispersed, Aiyana approached him. "Are you sure about this? A year is a long time, and not everyone here will make it easy for you." Tom looked around the canyon, at the red stone walls that would be his home for the next 12 months. "I've spent 11 years running from what I did here. Maybe it's time I stopped running and started making amends. It won't be easy. You'll have to learn our language, our customs, our ways of doing things, and some people will never trust you no matter what you do." "What about you?" Tom asked. "Do you trust me?" Aiyana considered the question seriously. "I'm learning to. You could have refused to bring me here. You could have lied to the council or tried to make excuses for what you did, but you told the truth, even knowing it might get you killed." She paused, looking out across the canyon where Apache children were playing by the creek, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. "I think maybe we can help each other," she said finally. "You need to find a way to live with what you've done. I need to figure out how to be Apache in a world that's changing too fast for the old ways to survive alone. Maybe together we can build something new." Tom nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he'd been carrying for 12 years. The debt wasn't paid, might never be fully paid, but at least he was finally facing it honestly. "Where do we start?" he asked. Aiyana smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, it reached her eyes. "With language lessons. If you're going to live here for a year, you'll need to do better than hello and thank you." As they walked back toward the main camp, Tom felt the canyon walls embracing them rather than threatening. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear Goyathle and his supporters talking in angry voices, and he knew that his year here would bring challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time since that terrible day at Canyon de Chelly, Tom Brennan felt like he was moving toward something, instead of running away from it. The girl he'd found hiding behind a water jar was now a woman finding her way between worlds. And maybe, just maybe, they could help each other discover what it meant to truly come home.